Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Chocobo Dash. I am one of your hosts, Nell Celestine.
And I'm your other host, here cloaked in darkness, Elliot Lefebvre.
We've got an interesting show lined up for you today for episode 10. For those of you who are wondering where episode 9 was, it wasn't technically labeled episode 9, and it won't actually be released in podcast form, but we did do a live reaction to the live letter on live stream. So, if you want to keep up on that kind of stuff, every now and again, we will do something like that. Check our Twitters, and it's usually the day of or the day before that we'll make that decision. Sometimes we'll do it a little bit more notice, but it was kind of a last-minute thing on this one.
Yeah, we just decided to do it at the last minute, and perhaps some point down the road we will include a lost episode 9 that will be completely redone and, some kind of collector's item. So please look forward to it.
Always please look forward to it. But speaking of things to look forward to, we've got several topics today, but some of them range from interesting to new news to oh no's.
So I think probably the best idea is to just start in on this now. Would you agree?
I agree. Let's hit with the oh no's first and get the bad news out of the way.
Yeah, the bad news is that for those of you who use Ultimate Game Cards, Ultimate Game Card is retiring this year. So that means that the cards are being pulled from retail stores, the cards are being removed from online retailers. After August 15th, you will not be able to buy them, and you will need to make sure to use any of the points before September 30th, otherwise they will no longer be valuable. I know there are some people who prefer to pay for things with pre-bought cards, so if you've been using this service, you should probably get this out of the way, get your cards, and use them now before they are no longer accepted anywhere.
Now, I'm going to jump in on this and say there's a lot of people that have been mentioning, we'll just buy the prepaid time cards. That's well and good for anybody who started in 2.0. The unfortunate thing is it's the same price for those time cards for regular players as it is for the legacy players, which means if the legacy player buys the time card, they don't get like a month and a half, they get a month. So there goes the legacy pricing out the window there. I know I fall into this category because I use the Ultimate Game Cards, so I am hoping that Square goes with an alternative route, because as much as it is, I don't like using my credit card online if I can help it. And there's also that thing that goes around that every now and again Square decides to, suddenly hiccup and stop rejecting credit cards of certain types.
Now, in my case, it doesn't affect me directly, but hopefully, again, it's always a good thing to have more options for how to pay in the game, and one of the things that Square's kind of struggled with, more or less since 14 started, was allowing players to pay more ways. Do you remember when your only option was Krista?
I remember that. I remember back in 11 when it was only credit cards, and then they added that verified by Visa, and about, I think, 3/4 of the community had to shuffle around with credit cards to get one to work.
Yep. Oh, that was a grand old time. I was lucky enough to, already have a Visa, but that's, again, I don't know why this is. I don't know why it is that Square has problems with accepting payment methods, something that pretty much every other company does without too much of a problem. Although Yoshida-san did mention in one of the recent letters that there is a legal issue sometimes with accepting payments from overseas, so that might have something to do with it. But regardless, hopefully there will be another card option for those of you who prefer to pay with cards rather than just by inputting your credit card information.
Not to mention the prepaid monthly cards do not cover the cost of additional retainers.
Very true. Which is, again, very important if you have additional retainers. I have declined.
All right. Let's move on to our next topic, shall we? Something a little bit more combat heavy.
I think that's right, and I think everyone can tell from my outfit what that next topic is going to be. It's something very near and dear to my heart, something I was very enthusiastic about, and I think I've made my affection for clear. I am, of course, referring to Frontline.
Gee, I was not expecting that.
I am all about Frontline. They posted an official preview to the site. And for those of you who have not seen it, the short version is that you will be able to in addition to earning wolf marks and earning PvP experience, just like you currently do in the Wolves' Den, you will also be able to earn soldiery and mythology tomes, and you can even earn a mount after you've emerged victorious enough times in the front line.
Oh, I might have to try the front lines, because I did see them out and they looked kind of cool.
See, this is the thing. For me, this is, exactly what I was looking for. I'm not a fan of arena-style PvP. I am a massive fan of objective-based PvP, which is what this is offering to be. So this is, right up my alley. It looks really fun. It looks really dynamic. And it looks like, players are going to have a lot of opportunities to take part, and it's going to make earning those wolf marks and getting those animal-themed PvP armors a lot easier once 2.3 drops a couple weeks.
My only concern with that is what if somebody brand new is starting into PvP? How badly are they going to be outmatched by the people who already have the PvP armor?
One of the things they've said that it's supposed to be a map type that's supposed to support people even if they are still getting freshly into PvP. For starters, I think there are a lot of people who have not gotten into PvP yet. I know that, my own efforts to try and get regular PvP nights going have met with a large number of people who, much like me, do not care one whit for arena PvP. The game has also removed one of the big barriers to entry in terms of how PvP actions are distributed and how you level them up. So that makes it a little bit easier for you to get in, even if you've only done a few matches in the Wolves' Den. I think there's also, last but not least, the fact that, unlike in the Wolves' Den, it's not a 4-on-4 match. You're going to have 24 people on each side, and it's going to be a 3-way battle. So if you do have a couple people there with, all rank 40 armor and smashing faces, you're going to have about 48 other people who can come beat their face in, and that, no matter how good your PvP armor is, you're not going to be able to walk away from an entire zone congregating on your face. There also appears to be a fairly strong PvE element to Frontline, as we know that there are going to be monsters, and we know that the primary objective is not killing other players, but obtaining and holding capture points throughout the map.
Sounds a lot like Dark Age of Camelot.
Yeah, I think there's definitely... They're inheriting some of that DNA, which is a very good thing.
Yeah, DOAC was pretty good. I remember playing that for a bit. But, yeah, I'm kind of interested in this, and I remember during the live that they mentioned something about looking to integrate some kind of duel features. That way you can test your PvP damage, because they have the mannequins for testing PvE, but, I would like to see the PvP dueling in there. It's just that way you can go, okay, well, I'm better than you, no, I'm better than you, and then have a match to actually prove it, rather than have to go out and be like, oh, well, I can DPS harder than so-and-so.
Also, it would be a great way to handle some role-playing conflicts, so...
That as well, especially to see like tanks versus DPS and stuff like that. It's like, oh, I'm a Dragoon, I can pierce your armor. No, you can't. I pop Sentinel kind of thing.
So let's move on to the other feature, the one that I was kind of misdirecting everyone to, that's not coming in 2.3, it's coming in 2.4. We've heard a little bit more about Ninja, and I am very interested in that.
Indeed. We didn't get a perfect bingo on that because Ninja is going to be a DPS class.
And I actually intend to talk about that next week in the Moglog, about how it's kind of an odd choice to have a DPS class when we're currently in a tank and healer shortage. But I think we can all agree that nobody wanted to see ninjas heal stabbing people with knives.
Well, I could understand if some ninjutsu would heal, because let's face it, ninjas did know how to use chemical concoctions for poisons, so I can imagine they could do antidotes as well.
You're raging.
I wasn't thinking of straight up healing, but you know what I mean. Like, they might be able to do something like a leeches or an insuna based on the madras that you perform, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, we've learned a little bit more from interviews about Ninja. We know that at this point that the madras are going to be combinations of hand gestures, which will allow
Naruto.
Which will allow you to perform a variety of actions. We also know that ninjas will have increased movement speed and their stealth, and Yoshida has said in interviews that some of this is actually designed to synchronize with Frontline, because this allows you to play a role that currently doesn't exist in the game, namely that of the scout. You can get places, you can explore things, and you can get out of places that wouldn't necessarily be possible otherwise.
My question is, they mentioned that there would be different poisons for different situations. How many different types of poisons and situations could there possibly be?
That also brings up a question about how many different abilities, because we can assume that Ninja will probably have access to about the same number of abilities as every other class. This brings up an interesting question of how you're going to work in the mudras and how you're going to work in the poisons into that repertoire, seeing as how, like, I can see a different poison being useful for, say, PvE or PvP, or a different poison being useful for, say, PvE on a single target or PvE when dealing with ads. But at the same time, every new ability, however situational, is also going to be limiting the number of other abilities you get. So either ninjas will wind up with way more tools than every other class, or they'll wind up with a lot of their tools locked behind a few mudra combos. So it's going to be interesting to see how they balance all of this out.
Well, considering the poisons are going to be the rogue abilities, I don't think they're going to be locked behind mudras.
Well, no, but you understand what I mean. I'm saying if they're locked behind poisons, locked behind mudras, locked behind... If they're going to lock what, every other class can do with with one button press behind 3 or 4 button presses for a ninja, that's a bit of a problem from a design standpoint.
True, but then that's what the player macros are for.
Yes, and I have most of my abilities on Monk macro down.
But let's shift topics here a little bit. I know Ninja's exciting, but until we get some more information, it's mostly speculation and hearsay. And
okay, well, what would you like to talk about next?
Well, there was a post on the official forums by, I'm going to horribly butcher the name, I apologize, Amalim, I think that's how you pronounce it. They basically translated a post on the Japanese side of the forums and cross-posted it to us, and it has had a very, very lengthy discussion on the pros and cons of the topic. It's basically called The Current State of Endgame Contents, a blog post from a Japanese player. Now, I could go into in-depth in reading this, but it is a very, very long read. If you are watching on YouTube, I will post a link in the description below. But basically, they've been asking to make the game less about mechanics-driven fights and more about challenging and hard. I can understand where they're coming from, but a lot of people are tend to assuming one way or the other on this. They tend to assuming that no, everything has to be pure mechanics driven, and then other people are assuming, well, if it's not mechanics driven and it's 100% random, then it's either too easy or too hard.
I think there's a lot of aspects to this post. For those of you who have not read the post, when the writer is talking about mechanics driven, what they're talking about is, for example, fights like, just to use an example that almost everyone has gone through by now, Titan hard mode. Now, Titan hard mode, no matter how good your gear is, no matter how high your health or your damage or anything else, if you get hit by landslide and pushed off the edge of the arena, you die. It doesn't matter if you did anything else right. So the whole fight comes down to understanding and dealing with these mechanics. Getting better gear does not make the mechanics easier or harder. The post also goes into detail, for instance, in some of the turns of Binding Coil, also the extreme primal fights where, it's really a matter of either you do work with this mechanic, and if you can't work with this mechanic, you will die, regardless of how much health you have or anything else. So the central argument is essentially that, by making all of these fights mechanic-driven, you can't nerf these fights. No matter how many stacks of the Echo you get, if you have a player on your team who just cannot, due to latency or not playing very well, dodge a landslide, that player is always going to get shoved off, and they're always going to die, and they can't clear Titan without a bunch of other people who are always dodging.
Not to mention, as another example that they mentioned was Twintania's dive bombs. If you hit the outside wall of Twintania's arena, it's not like a normal wall, it's instant death. If one person moves too early on dive bombs or one person moves too late, the dive bombs will hit everybody, and chances are 90% of your party will be knocked into that wall and die.
And on the one hand, I think this is a very defensible claim, because by making these, very gimmick-driven fights, you wind up with a case, and this is something Nell and I have both talked about in the past, that, if you're stuck on this fight for whatever reason, or you don't find this kind of fight fun, you are completely stuck. You have to just kind of bash your head against a wall. On the other hand, by removing that element, there comes a point where the fight basically is just beating down ever bigger bags of hit points, where essentially, a harder fight is just one with a longer health bar, and, if you have enough MP, you clear it. If you don't have enough MP, you don't clear it.
Now, one of the suggestions I was reading, and I do really like this one, was what if they made, as an example, a half rotation list, like a rotation list of moves where they'll do certain moves at certain time points, or certain moves based off of HP percentage, and the rest of the moves are randomized. Limit the number of instant kills down to usually about 1 per boss, 2 maybe for like the endgame raids, but make it so that way once you remove that endgame raid option, like as an example, when Coil went to Duty Finder, when it went from basically being the endgame raid to the second one, because second Coil came out, instead of keeping all the mechanics exactly the same and just giving an HP damage and recovery buff, they could have lowered some of the instant kill mechanics. Instead of doing an insane amount of damage, they could have had it do either less, or they could have it do a percentage. The Twintania wall, they could have just made it a straight wall instead of instant death.
There's also things, for instance, you could do, for example, if you are, instead of having the Echo buff, buff your healing, just, again, I'm using, or Twintania also works, instead of, instead of upping your health, for instance, the Echo means that Titan's landslides take longer to cast, or Twintania has a lengthened window and will knock you around less during dive bombs, so it's your positioning and your time of movement has to be less exact. Another option also is to, and this is something that the game did very well at launch and did very well in 2.1, and 2.2 has kind of moved away from that, is really allowing you to engage and or bypass things as you like. If you do not necessarily want to engage in, the highest end content, then, and you don't find those kinds of mechanics fun, then you can still have, things to work toward that don't require you to deal with these sometimes very punishing mechanics. I think the post on a whole, I don't agree with all of its points, but I do agree with the sense that this patch especially has really focused on a very specific mode of play, which, as the post points out, makes up about 10% of the player population.
And they even went on to say that they don't speak for any one particular group. How they perceive it, and they apparently are a endgame raider, is they perceive that the high-end raiders get the pattern, they memorize the pattern, and everything for that becomes dull, boring, auto farm. The core group or the actual MMO player group, mainstream, I think was the word that they used.
Yes.
They get frustrated trying to deal with the mechanics because they're not as good as the hardcore. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but they try to do the content, but they just can't get through the mechanics, or they don't have everything memorized, and they get more and more frustrated trying to get through it. And then you have the casual group, which look at that stuff and go, nope, not for me, I'm done.
And as many people have pointed out, that's, that group right there is the biggest portion of an MMO's audience. The biggest portion of people, Nell and I are both endgame geared. We've both done a lot of endgame stuff, but at the same time, we are atypical in that regard. We are, coming to you here in a devoted to the game. Obviously, we're committed. We do not represent the vast majority of the people who play the game, and if you're listening to our podcast, for starters, we love you and we're very happy to have you in our audience, but you probably don't represent the average player either. The average player plays the game and then logs off, and that's it. They don't spend a whole bunch of time talking about it and listening about it and analyzing it. So it's that group of players. It's those people who, enjoy the game so long as it's not either actively unpleasant to play or telling them that they can't accomplish anything in the game. That is the majority of the player base, and it's always going to be.
I personally think that anything with a storyline, like an actual storyline, should have a story mode and then a hard mode. Coil personally should be no exception. But my personal opinion, and I know this is probably some flame bait, but my personal opinion is Coil 2 should have been I-100 gear with a story mode and easier mechanics, followed by a hard mode with I-110 gear and harder mechanics. And now they're adding a brutal mode with the same I-110 gear and insane difficulty. This is the difficulty that they originally planned, and the reward is a title. And I can understand that, because if you want to be a hardcore player, put your money where your mouth is and actually go through the brutal.
I would say, actually, that pretty much anything other than, I'm going to even flame bait further, I'm going to say anything, harder than, the baseline. The baseline should be something that if anyone wants to complete it and they're willing to put in some time, I say, about 75% of the player base should be able to clear it. About 70, that means that, 75% of people should be able to clear through Coil 2 in, as you put it, story mode. I think you should be able to obtain the rewards. The difference, if you're going in on a harder mode, is you should get bragging rights rewards, and it should be a lot faster to get your rewards. Because, if you're banging your head against hard mode Coil, or, banging your head against extreme primals on the day of release, then yeah, you deserve rewards faster. You are clearly committed to, I want to hit the hardest stuff possible, and I want to get the hardest content down as fast as I can. But, there's no reason to gate that as, there's no way, if you aren't interested in this, that you can ever get to the best stuff. There's no way that you can ever get there, because, as the post points out, for some people, this mechanical stuff, this, endgame content is just not fun. And for the vast majority of the player base, this is not where you're going. This is, the sort of challenge that turns people off.
Yeah, and the whole static thing where it's basically the game played by 8 people, and a lot of the endgame groups are taking 8 people that can dodge mechanics and not necessarily 8 people who are friends.
Yeah, and, and you can say that's, more of a result of, okay, some people prefer to play the game with friends, some people prefer to play the game to win, but wouldn't it be nice if you didn't have to choose one or the other? Wouldn't it be nice if you could play the game with friends and still expect to be able to win?
Yeah, but that's a huge topic. It's over 50 pages. I suggest checking it out. Make sure you take a lot of the forum posts with a grain of salt, because there is a lot of back and forth on this, but there is a lot of good suggestions in there. So feel free to read, feel free to comment, but make sure you actually, take a few moments before you hit enter in your rage-induced fury and actually put some thought into your post and come up with a suggestion, or counter somebody's idea if you don't think it's going to work, but give reasons. Actually, constructive feedback, because that's the best way we're going to get the devs to notice what's going on and to make the game better, is through constructive discussion.
Yep. Saying this sucks doesn't help anyone. It doesn't do anything but hurt feelings and raise tempers, and it's not going to make the game better one way or the other. If you don't have anything constructive to add, you can always say, I agree with X, or I don't agree with X, or I disagree with this, but
if you're going to say those, make sure you give reasons.
And don't be nasty. Don't make personal attacks. Don't, go spewing anger because this person disagreed with me. They must be the root of all evil. No, maybe they just see things differently, and you might be able to learn from them. They might be able to learn from you. You
might not necessarily agree, and that's not a bad thing. The MMO universe is diverse, so it's all about catering to everybody and getting a pool of perception, not a single field of vision. But I think we've discussed this topic enough. Let's move on to another kind of glitchy topic.
Yep. And this one's a little bit I was going to say we might want to end off on a higher note, but this isn't exactly a higher note either. What some people they've noticed a problem that if you have completed achievements in the version 1.0 of Final Fantasy XIV, but you didn't pick up the title or whatever, and I think this is also especially affecting non-legacy players who did complete the achievement but are not technically on the legacy program, then you don't have the title, or you don't have the unlock, or you don't have the prize, and there's no way to obtain it now. You can't, if you go to talk to the achievement NPC, he won't give you the reward anymore. So essentially, you have the reward, you have the achievement, you should be able to get it, but you can't get it.
I can understand the items. That's not an issue, especially to me. But I know that in 1.0 of the game, I talked to these NPCs, I got my titles. I don't have access to my 1.0 titles.
I'm pretty sure I have access to the ones that I should have, but I think it's still, it's kind of one of those oversights that I think is almost inevitable when you're redoing an entire game from scratch, but it is something that should be addressed. And I think that's true to form for all of the achievements. So that includes items, that includes titles, that includes everything. If you did that already, you should be able to get it again. And for that matter, I think lesser versions of these things should at some point, maybe in a year or so, be obtainable even to people who came in fresh.
I want my title Crystal Bearer.
I agree, you should have your, but maybe in a year or so someone could be the lesser Crystal Bearer. Or the
but
Crystal
then I
Watcher.
can't throw things around with gravity. Wait, wrong game. If anybody gets that reference, please feel free to tweet us. I want to hear the first person who tweets out the reference for that. I will definitely give them a shout out on the next episode.
That sounds like a good idea to me. So, do we have anything else that we'd like to discuss this week? Anything that springs to mind?
Well, why don't you mention the unfortunate news you got for the FanFest?
Yes, I will. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend the FanFest this year, not because of money or anything else, but because the FanFest is occurring on the same weekend as my anniversary, and when given the choice between celebrating my anniversary of being married to my best friend and celebrating Final Fantasy XIV, I'm sorry, I'm going to pick my wife.
For shame. No, I can't really blame you.
Sorry, not sorry.
But I will see what I can do, because I will be going, and I might see what I can do to do like kind of a mini vlog while down there. No promises, but we'll see how that goes. In the meantime, I am currently working on getting my plane ticket, making sure my passport is ready to go, because I live in Canada. But I am definitely going.
Yep. And I'm sure there will be all sorts of fun things to see there, and I may ask you to try and steal me some extra stuff.
We'll see what we can do. For those of you who are not aware, the dates for the Fan Festival in Las Vegas are October 18th and 19th, and I believe London is the 25th of October?
Yes, and then Japan is December. I can't remember exactly what date.
No, it's November.
For some reason, that's right. It was an original typo when they typoed it as December, but yeah, it's November, the week after the 25th.
So there you have it. If you can make it to one, awesome. I know I've got friends who are going to the one in London, and hopefully I can coerce them if they get a different reward and it's a minion, that I can snag that from them for the minion collection.
But I think that's all the interesting stuff that we have this week, but it seems like news is coming fast and furious, and we're right on the heels of patch 2.3 coming out.
So we'll definitely be doing that news in a short bit. Next episode, I do believe we will be doing a bit of a change of scenery, but please look forward to it, as Yoshida would say.
Yes, always please look forward to it. So, as always, if you have any comments, suggestions, feedback, please feel free to leave them in the comments of the YouTube video or tweet them to us, leave them in the official Lodestone thread. There are other places where this is posted, and you can also get in touch with us there, but we tend to check the Lodestone thread and YouTube and Twitter before we check any other sources. You can catch up with both of us on Twitter. I am Elliot_Lefebvre.
I'm Nell_Celestine.
And of course, you can always leave comments, suggestions as well in the Moglog, which runs every other Monday. Although we're doing 2 back-to-back this month because we had to do 2 WildStar columns back-to-back. So It'll even out starting on next month.
As always, you can follow us on Twitter. You can leave your comments. But first and foremost, I wanted to shout out the thank yous to everybody who's been supporting us so far on this show. You guys, your fans, the fans are amazing. I've gotten to meet a couple actually today at my work, so I know you're out there, and I really appreciate you guys listening in, and it's always great to meet people. So thank you. Thank you all for being amazing fans of the show.
Thank you so much, and thank you for every bit of feedback you've given us, positive or negative. We're always happy to hear about it.
As always, I'm Nell Celestine.
And I'm Elliot Lefebvre.
Bidding you adieu.